everybody. Welcome to another episode of Politically Depressed. As always, I'm your host, Ayman McAdam. So it has been an entire year of this podcast, and it's kind of wild. I talked a little bit about this in the last episode, but I'm going to dedicate this episode to talking about the last year and the year ahead. Those that know me know that I'm not a massive... Those that know me know that I'm not a massive fan of New Year's and of kind of like dissecting our lives and history, essentially, into these year pockets. Whatever. I'm not going to quote Gramsci, don't worry. But regardless, a year since this podcast. And this is going to be the 54th episode. Almost nearly an episode a week for an entire year. Which again, for me, who tends to be very irregular or like pick stuff up and then like drop it quite quickly, I'm quite pleased with myself and giving myself a little pat on the back. Anyway, but yeah, I'm going to talk about sort of, a year in review through the lens of this podcast. And then, talk about things coming up, I guess. Before I start, I want to give a huge shout out to all of you lovely people who have become patrons in the last week or two, especially since my last episode wherein, I talked a lot about it. I really appreciate you. And it's a constant reminder that there are a lot of people out there listening, but also that what I'm doing is worth supporting. It's validating, but also like quite literally provides the material support to continue this project, which I'm very grateful for, and I hope I continue to produce the content that keeps you satisfied. Sorry, I'm not that cynical. I really do appreciate it, and I don't just see this as content in that kind of amorphous way. Quite literally, I mean, the last 2-3 months now, I've been so bogged down in this video essay, and I think it's coming together. I'm working on the third draft of the script. I filmed myself reading the second draft, and I edited it together, and it was super fucking boring. But I think this draft is gonna be the draft. So inshallah, hopefully, towards like the middle of January, you should see my second video essay coming out. I'll definitely do a lot of promos in the lead up to it. But yeah, in that, I really feel like I'm saying a lot of stuff that needs to be said that's like interesting but useful and important, and it's like a thing. It's not just me kind of rambling. And even in my rambles, I do say some whatever stuff. All right. So anyway, just to wrap that up, thank you. Appreciate you. And for anyone who is listening who wants to be part of that community, the door is always open. Actually, now I did do a thing, I think for the first time. We have a discount code for yearly subscribers. If you have not yet made your New Year's resolution, how about listening to new podcasts in the new year, or more podcasts in the new year? We have a discount code of 30% off for yearly subscribers, which ends on the 10th of January. So get in while you can. All right, that's it. That's enough promo. So 1 year of this podcast, it's crazy. The idea to make this podcast kind of came in a bit of a fluke. I had been trying to do different things last year. I briefly started a podcast with my partner called Bella Felsefe, which means stop philosophizing. It's a term our parents used to use when they basically wanted us to shut up. That kind of fell apart, mostly because they were not available, but I had this energy, and it was like, no, I want to just... So I made this. And it was a way for me to get a lot of the ideas just out of my head and thoughts and feelings. And over the last year, obviously, there's been a lot to talk about and a lot to share and a lot of very incoherent expressions. I don't know how to describe it. What we've been seeing in Gaza, you know, I started this podcast, like 3 months into the genocide? And none of us thought that we'd still be here talking about not just the exact same thing, but like far, far worse. And like escalated and accelerated. I mean, just today there are reports that the Israelis have evacuated and taken over the Kamal Adwan hospital, which was the last remaining hospital in the north of the Gaza Strip. And really, there's like no resistance. I mean, sorry, from the outside, there's no opposition. There's no outside forces really being able to prevent and stop and hold accountable the Israelis. While they are completely ethnically cleansing the north and bombing areas in the south and still doing their bullshit with their forces are still in Rafah. But yeah, this operation in the north that's been going on for 3 months, this siege, horrendous, and I don't know. I've been talking obviously about it a lot, and a part of it is trying to think out loud about what I should be doing, what I think other people should be doing, but also giving moments for people to just sort of feel the gravity of the situation. Not as a distraction, the opposite. Not as in don't think, feel, but like thinking and feeling are one and the same, kind of. They're two sides of the same coin of our human experience, essentially. But also in doing this work of being engaged and being active. And I personally, at the moment, I'm in a very weird place. I'm in a bit of a limbo. And I think that limbo has to do with the ceasefire in Lebanon. I don't know if I've discussed this, but ever since the ceasefire, I've been kind of, I don't know if numb is the right word, but it's been harder for me to access the kind of vibe, let's say. I feel very stuck in a very particular moment or positionality as a Lebanese, who obviously, as I've been talking about, have been very aware and very like fucked up over Gaza, which again doesn't exist in isolation. There is a project of essentially ethnic cleansing of the entirety of Palestine. In the 48 territories, there's incredibly harsh repression, as in within what is known as the State of Israel. In the 67 territories, Gaza and the West Bank, in the West Bank, there's increased settler activities, pogroms, and like open declarations of full annexation, right? Also, only a week ago, started these operations in Jenin by the Palestinian Authority, which, as we know, is just like a security enforcers for the occupation. It's just got a Palestinian face to it. And so, yeah, it's been fucked. But so then once things escalated in Lebanon, and things really, really fucking escalated, and especially up until the very last moment, again, it is really important to talk about the psychological aspect of all these things, because it is an aspect of their warfare. The day of the ceasefire, Israel bombed Beirut just like dozens of times. It was horrible, and it was the biggest kind of scatter shot. They were hitting areas that they'd never hit before, and whatever. It was fucked up. It was a horrible day. And then that was the last, of that kind of bombardment. And ever since, for me, there was that kind of, wow, okay, things got so bad, alhamdulillah, that things are a bit calm. aware, obviously, that there's nothing that's like changed the Israelis. You know what I mean? Like nothing fundamentally has changed. If anything, they might just be using the ceasefire, as they have done throughout their history, as a way of buying time, as a way of cementing the sort of like territories they've captured. I'm really worried, for instance, that these 60 days of ceasefire are essentially a way of normalizing occupation in the south of Lebanon, of slowly entrenching themselves even further. As we know, they've done like 300 violations of the ceasefire. Anyway, I got really animated there. Sorry, it's just. It is this really weird feeling that I know people are experiencing, wherein obviously the current moment is better than it was a month ago, while the Israelis were bombing left, right, and center, but very aware that they have not left, and also that the main thing of all this, the genocide in Gaza, has not stopped. But so there's this very bittersweet experience. Bittersweet does not capture it at all, but I think it's like the closest approximation to this kind of, I don't know, numb is also another word. But so at a very personal level, I'm just sort of like checking in or like checking out, whatever. I'm sort of clocking this sort of like messy whatever place I'm in. Again, when I recorded the first episode of this podcast, there had only been like a low-lying war in Lebanon. It had already started, obviously, on October 8th. But all throughout that year, there had been these fears of it escalating even further, and constant signs from the Israelis. I think it's good that I set this up for myself, as an avenue to sort of express. It's been really great having this functionally like a support network, but like as in this sort of community. I don't know. The messages I get from people are always really heartwarming and nice. And I don't know. I don't really go out much. I still don't. Ever since I got back from Marseille, for instance, I've seen like 2 or 3 people. And yeah, so it's nice having, not because I don't know people, not because I'm not like a nice person or anything, or that I've alienated people, but I just feel so alienated constantly, and in the state of ghurbe, of being in in the diaspora. It's been nice connecting with people online through this, having a space to like share my thoughts, which, as you could probably tell, I have many of. Um, and yeah, developing this whole thing. I don't know. I mean, now with the video essays, I feel like it's another big step, but I'm happy I did this, and I am going to continue it in the next year. Um, but yeah, I also, another thing that I've been talking about since the beginning is Sudan. And Sudan, again, same with Palestine. It's just only gotten worse. And it's a horrible situation. There's really not much more to say. I mean, it definitely doesn't get enough attention. But I say this knowing that Palestine gets a lot of attention, but, you know, what does that do? Okay, people are talking about it, eyes on Rafah, eyes on Palestine, but, you know, there's this joke, like, as a Lebanese, like, or as a Palestinian, استفدنا إيه? Like, what do we benefit? um, Obviously, I'm not as cynical as all that. I do, think these are good developments that we've seen over the last year. But regardless, Sudan is possibly, I think, no, by numbers, it is worse than Gaza. By numbers of those experiencing famine, displacement. It's a much larger country. And yeah, it's horrible. I hope people are still donating, are still reading, are still trying to continuously like familiarize themselves with what is still to this day being described, especially in Western media, as a silent crisis, as like ridiculous, But anyway, another thing that I've been talking a lot about in the last year, which is the only one of these that there's been a major breakthrough since I started this podcast, that is Syria. I started this podcast essentially, 12 years into the Syrian revolution, at a point in which the counter-revolution had been so extreme, that, Syrians had lost hope, that there's this sort of feeling of constant defeat, of this like impossible situation. But yeah, I mean, in just 10 days, all that was reversed. Of course, obviously, it wasn't just 10 days. I'd been speaking about this for the last year, and many Syrians, never stopped talking about it since 2011. But this has been a 13-year-long struggle that finally successfully overthrew this 54-year-old regime, this murderous, brutal authoritarian regime, which, in its moments of fall, and thereafter, we saw, khalas, there's no longer this ability for anybody to claim that it is not, that the Assad regime was not a brutal, carceral, authoritarian system in which thousands upon thousands of people, hundreds of thousands, were forcibly disappeared and murdered, in which it was this sort of kingdom of silence, which it was sort of described as. Once we saw the insides of these prisons, the machinery, the mass graves, once people finally were able to just like freely speak out. And I'm reveling a bit in seeing these tankies squirm, because some of them are now trying to jump ship and like change course. And we're not going to let them. We're not going to let them. But regardless, the freeing of prisoners, the liberation of Saidnaya, I mean, it's huge. It is still monumental. I know social media, I know because Gaza is still happening, I know because Lebanon and, most focus is paid onto that, but I don't know how to describe it. It still brings a tear to my eye when I think about those images. When I think only 3-4 days earlier, when we'd seen the liberation of prisons in Hama, a Lebanese friend of mine posted online in a kind of private message, like, can you imagine if this happens to Saidnaya? And I wrote to her like, imagine. And even in that moment of imagining, I cried. Saidnaya is notorious. It has been for decades. And the concept of it being liberated, it's unimaginable. And it happened. And again, that's a moment to cherish, a moment to constantly feed our hope and inspiration, for possibilities, for ruptures, regardless of what we think and what we've seen, obviously, of HTS, of sort of these new political machinations. Again, I think situating all of this within 13 years of revolution, again, one in which the central thing was the overthrow of the regime and the liberation of these prisons, it's huge. But anyway, I've gone on a bit too much about that, but it is important to note the shifts that have happened in the last year, and especially in the things that I kind of specifically focus on in this podcast. I mean, I guess another one is white supremacy, and that's also gotten much, much worse. Trump was reelected. And we've seen it's not just about Trump, it's also all the people he has around him. Fucking Elon Musk is now like a full-on political force, like not just as a fucking billionaire and someone with a lot of influence, but now within the chambers of government. I don't think that's going to last very long. I mean, big personalities tend to clash, and they're both petty fucking personalities. But yeah, that's been really fucked. The far right have made gains politically, electorally in Europe, here in Austria specifically. Um, and we have yet to see the kind of serious response from any, grassroots opposition within Europe. Obviously here and there, but it has not yet hit that kind of like critical mass. That I think it's very frustrating. And again, what worries me the most is that I made this episode like months ago that white people cannot stop fascism alone because white people oftentimes cannot see their whiteness as a power structure, as something that inhibits them from essentially radicalizing, from seeing the violence that stems from it. And yeah, I don't know how to. I mean, I did that whole episode. If you want to listen to it, it was very much so inspired by this like huge protest that happened against the right, which functionally had a little intervention by Palestinian solidarity protesters, who were segregated and like what's the word, kettled by the cops. And I don't understand how people can protest fascism without protesting Zionism. I mean, I understand it in this very, very myopic Austrian lens, wherein, whatever, I'm not going to get that much into it, but there definitely has not been that like mass reckoning. People are still going about their days. People are still going about their holidays and thinking about what's next and where are we going to go, Spain or Italy? Bulgaria looks nice. Let's go to Dubai, like I heard about this white guy who went to Oman recently and I just shook my head and it gets me angry at this point, Not at this point, it has for a while, but it's just like, you fucking white people, wake up. I don't believe in this wake up or whatever, but it's just, in certain ways, I have become very acute. I no longer feel like justifying myself sometimes. This has been a progress through this podcast, for sure. But also with the experiences that I've had over the last year, wherein, khalas, I'm just going to say the thing, and people will respond the way they respond. But I'm not going to waste my time preemptively, responding to a Zionist, or you know what I mean, like preemptively assuming a certain standpoint and then trying, no, I'm just going to say it as it is, as I see it, as I want to. And so there's none of this room for, I don't know, holding space for, I mean, whatever, it's been a bit complicated. But regardless, very personally, I'm in a very interesting place. I'm definitely not in the place I was last year when I started this podcast. What's very funny is that this podcast has become quite natural. I'm glad. I mean, after 54 episodes, it must. But I remember even like 30 episodes in, it still wasn't natural for me to sit and talk and whatever. Now it has a bit more, a lot more. And again, it's just this thing of, I'm just not going to second what's the word? Second guess myself all the time. I find this because, I mean, there's also this like, have you ever seen like a white cishet guy say some shit and your response is, God, I wish I had that confidence. Like the confidence to just go up and just say that like the most ridiculous thing and believe, it's true. And yeah, fuck it. I've been manifesting that confidence. Also because I know I've done the work. I don't want to have that confidence that makes me cocky and that makes me say stuff that might be hurtful or harmful or problematic. I've done a lot of work. I've done a lot of listening. I'm still doing that work. But on certain topics, on certain things, I'm just gonna say a thing, and especially for those white feelings, for those cishet feelings, I'm gonna pay them no mind. And I'm always open to criticism. I'm always open to hearing whatever. But yeah, there is a lot of then the inverse of it. Like that confidence comes on the back of a lot of repression, a lot of maligning. I mean, I think a lot of the reasons that I hesitate a lot of the times to talk about certain things is because I know that it is not only like a minority position, but also something that is like quite literally you've never heard, right? Um, and so I find myself talking to, for instance, to white people where it's like, oh, I'm the first queer Arab you've ever spoken to. Oh, I'm the first Arab leftist you've ever spoken to. Or, oh, I'm the first one who's ever talking to you about these post-colonial ideas. Or, like, the synthesis of all this. Oh, I'm the first person to talk to you about whiteness. And that these are not minority opinions, right? But, like, in their perspective, they are. And in their perspective, it's the first time hearing them, which I find really frustrating. But there is that kind of power, I think, in just assuming and like centering the periphery, right? And just talking about queer Arab experience, not in this kind of, okay, I'll start with the heteronormative experience to situate you within whatever, and then here, no, I'm just going to start with it. I'm not going to cater towards the hegemon any longer. I'm aware of its existence, obviously, I confront it, but I am now in the phase of my life, with this podcast as well, of starting from where I want to start, so that we can get to certain new places, because I am fucking exhausted of rehashing the same conversations over and over again. And I think that's kind of clear. I don't know if there is a progression. I would love to hear from people, actually, how this podcast has progressed. Or how your relationship with this podcast, with me, has progressed over the last year, you know? Because I only have certain access, and also because, again, like I'm sitting here talking, I edit it, I put it, and it's there. And obviously it's a complete different relationship to all this, listening to it. And so, especially for the real ones who have been listening for at least a few months, yeah, I would love to hear how this has been. I might post it or like read it out loud or I don't know what, with your permission, of course. Because, yeah, I'd just be very interested in that, actually. Like, also, even your readings of me, you know? Because I do love these messages when people message, like, saying, oh, you sound really tired. And I'm like, oh, I didn't realize. Or, yeah, read into something that I didn't see or I didn't hear. And that gets me thinking, like, oh, that's interesting. But yeah, looking forward, I think I am going to continue this podcast into the next year. It's something that has been very good for me. Obviously, the regularness, the connections with people, the ability just to sit here once a week and talk about stuff that I think need to be talked about, especially with certain perspectives, including the emotional one. I think that's really important. I don't see enough spaces for that. And it is difficult. You know, you can't have too big of a space. But I think I'm well situated for a lot of that. Yeah. I'm gonna do more video essays. Hopefully again, January. Aiming for like January 15, something like that. For this next video essay. Mutual aid podcast. I haven't talked about that. So over the last year, I don't know if people know, but I was doing a thing called the Palestine Film Club, which I might restart, at least like a few special editions, because there are a few films I really want to watch. But it is through that film club that I got to meet someone named Isra. Isra joined the watch parties from the very beginning, and we got to know each other. And from there, we formed a relationship online. And I don't know, we really got to dig each other. It was like the conversations were great. And at a certain point, I reached out to them and I was like, do you by any chance want to do a whole podcast on the mutual aid? Like on mutual aid, sorry. And that's how it started. And we just interviewed Dean Spade, the author of the book Mutual Aid from 2020. Very cool person, very cool activist. And we've got a bunch of other really cool people lined up to talk to. And mutual aid has been something I've been thinking about a lot for the last 5 years and like engaged in. So look out for that as well. What else is there? I mean, also just like building and working on From the Periphery as like a collective, giving it legs, bolstering it, working with other people in the group has been really great and really important, because I wouldn't want to do this stuff alone. Like a lot of the stuff I talk about is about like community, is about collective organizing. And so doing all this within From the Periphery has also been just fantastic, and like doing work for From the Periphery so that the other projects, Leila Shami, for instance, is going to start doing a podcast with Elia on Syria, the Impossible Revolution. And I'm really looking forward to that. And that's like something I'm like, ooh, I want to fund that. I want to support it. And since I'm within the collective, it's like, oh, raising money for that project, like not just for me. So that's been great. Just being in community with Leila Shami, with Ilya Ayoub, with so many of these people, and now with Isra, it's been fantastic, and I love them, and they're comrades, and so it's been a journey, and I feel like I'm kind of on the right track. I don't think we're on the right track globally, obviously, fucking hell, regionally, and I can't separate the two. But if I were to, just for a second, I'm in kind of a better place than I was last year. Yeah, things were all over the place. I still was like in this weird amorphous relationship with my white German therapist. I now have a better therapist. Yeah, I don't know. It's been a year of politically depressed. I hope you've all enjoyed this year. I hope I've made your year a little bit better. And I hope to continue being a part of your lives in the next year. And yeah. So I guess I'll wrap it up there. This has been another episode of Politically Depressed. If you enjoy this podcast, there's a number of ways you can support it to help it grow. The easiest way to do so, leave a rating wherever you're listening to this podcast. On YouTube, subscribe and like it. On Spotify, you can leave like a 5-star rating. It takes a second, really helps this podcast like reach new audiences, the algorithm bullshit. Same with Apple Podcast. But other than that, you can become a member of our Patreon for as little as $5 a month. Or now with 30% off, $34 for a year. You get access to a lot of cool stuff, like my sub-series Keep This Between Us, but you also get an invite to the monthly hangout, and a lot of other cool stuff. Otherwise, I'll leave the tip jar in the show notes below, and yeah, just tell your friends, tell your family, share this podcast wherever you, whatever. All right, this has been another episode of Politically Depressed. See you all in the next one.